Hi friends, it's Dawn the Recovery Lady here with episode 6 of Conquering Empty Nest Syndrome. This week's topic is going to be on the stages of grief. There was a psychologist, I believe she was a psychologist, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, that decades ago came up with the 5 stages of grief. Now, what do you think of when we say grief? Usually you think of death. That's the first thing that comes to our mind. But the truth is that we go through stages of grief many times in our lives when we lose things that are really important to us. We see this a lot in addiction, working with a lot of clients. They don't realize they go through the stages of grief when they lose their drug of choice. We see that when we lose a loved one to death. We can go through it when we lose a job. We can also go through the stages of grief when we become an empty nester. Hence, we move into empty nest syndrome. So what are they and what do they look like? Well, the first stage of grief is denial. You think a lot about denial with not wanting to see something that's going on. You see that in family systems. No, Jordan's not out there drinking every night. Oh, Tommy was holding the drugs for a friend. He wouldn't do drugs. Okay, I've sat with a lot of family groups and heard parents and loved ones say that kind of thing. They worked all night, but no, they're not fooling around. They're just working. Those kinds of things. And I use those examples, and I've experienced many of them, because what happens with denial is that it's just too painful for us to accept that it is a reality. In denial, with empty nesting, it's a loss of a parental role. It's a loss of a job. It's a job you did free of charge for 2 decades on average, and longer if you have multiple kids, because that will stretch it out. So think about that. All of a sudden, the last one leaves. The house is empty. Your job that you have dedicated your life, your love, your emotion, your time, your energy, your money to, it's gone. And that's how you functioned. That's a loss. Losing that active parenting role is a loss, and it needs to be grieved. What's that going to feel like? It's going to be different for everybody. It could be sadness, not wanting to get up, walking around the house depressed, looking at the empty room that may be a shrine, especially when they're out. And you could do something fun with that empty room. My best friend just made a guest room out of the rooms, and she had no hesitation. She knew exactly what she wanted to do. And then there's some of us that it just takes a little bit longer. So denial is that first stage. It's just too painful to accept that job, that role, that thing I've dedicated myself to is gone. And that'll manifest a little bit differently for everyone. The second stage is anger. There is a episode of Frasier, not the new Frasier reboot, but the original Frasier, and it's season 6, episode 1. I'm going to put a link down in the description below. When I used to teach on grief in groups, teach group therapy on grief, that was part of the lesson. And the reason watching Frasier season 6, episode 1, because in that episode, he loses his job. And he goes through the stages of grief, and they mark it on the screen before each scene: denial, anger, so you know what it looks like. And that was such a useful tool. When I saw it, I used it therapeutically with people, because it shows what grief looks like outside of death, which is what we associate it with. So I will put the link, like I said, below, and I encourage you to watch it. I hope you don't have to buy it, but that's what it looks like. And in that episode, he gets so frustrated, he beats up a piñata, because our anger can come out in different ways. For empty nesting, our anger can come out passive aggressively, meaning we're not yelling at the kid. We're so upset they're gone. We don't know who we are. They don't need or want us. They want to go be independent to run their lives. So what happens? It's phone calls, for example. Well, I remember when you used to love me. Oh, it's been a while since you checked in. I just dedicated my whole life to you. It's those little jabs, and we say kidding. There's no such thing. When you give somebody a jab like that with a little sarcasm built in, that is passive, meaning you're not overtly being angry, and it's aggressive. It's passive aggressive, and it's not a direct form of communication. So you might think, I don't have anger, I don't get mad, but if you're seeing those kind of behaviors, that's not bringing your child closer. That's pushing them further away, so that when the phone rings and they see your name, it's going to be like, ugh, I don't want to put up with that today. I know this is painful, and all these things I've done myself or I'm in the midst of doing. That's why this journey together is so important. So that's stage 2. Stage 3 of grief is bargaining. Bargaining is, historically, like, I don't know, your loved one's in the hospital dying, and it's like, God, if you just don't let this person die, I will do whatever you want. I will acknowledge you. Please, I need you now. You're on your knees and you're begging. That's what it traditionally looks like. But you can play games with bargaining in your grief, especially, if you're really struggling and don't really want to move into the next stage. Bargaining could be, well, I'll give you $200 extra a month if they're away at college. If you come home for the holidays and they want to go spend the holidays with a new friend they met at school, that's a form of bargaining. That's a form of manipulation too, but it's a form of bargaining, and it's a stage of grief. So when you find yourself doing it and you realize you're in grief, it takes away the shame. Guilt is good. Guilt causes us to change. Shame is bad. Guilt is what I did is bad. Shame is I am bad. So we don't want to feed shame. We want to recognize what this is, realize it's part of the grief process of losing our parenting role, and make proper amends. Wow, that really stunk that I did that. It must have made you feel awful. I can't imagine. Don't justify it when you make an amends. I am so sorry, I'm working on that. And then really work on it. Watch these videos, look for other videos, get a counselor if you need to. After bargaining, when the bargaining isn't quite working, depression sets in. And please know that all of these can happen in different orders. You could be all the way in one stage. You could be in denial, then go to anger, then go to bargaining and back. It's a cycle. So after bargaining is depression. And this is where you really need to self-monitor and listen to your loved ones. Depression there can be situational depression, which this often is, which you're going to move through. But if you start having any thoughts of self-harm, not wanting to be here, nobody needs me, the world will be better off without me, it's time to check with a licensed professional. Good way to start especially if you're feeling it and then you have people you love and respect saying, hey, I think you might be kind of depressed. Know that if you are, you're compromised, so you're not going to think you are, but you need to listen to the people you trust. You can start with your primary care practitioner, get referrals. If you ever get to that point where you just think, I just don't want to be here, I want to end it, don't be afraid to talk about it. Every time you speak it, it loses power. We have the National Suicide Prevention number 988. Be sure to call that. I just want to touch on that because there are people that can go into that. So that's the lethargy, the oh my gosh, that's the, they're not here anymore. Who am I? And I don't know what to do with my world. And if you're married, you might look at your spouse and go, ugh, we stopped being a couple when we became parents. That's true of a lot of people. When you become a parent, you start looking at the children and stop looking at each other, and that's why the divorce rate can be so high during the empty nest years. And then after depression, when you get into an acceptance stage, that is the 5th stage, the acceptance, that means you're on the road to healing. That's where I've just moved into personally in my empty nest journey, because I didn't like living in the discomfort. I know this stuff, but I researched it. I talked to somebody about it when I started school years ago. They said, every good counselor has a good counselor. So don't think you're going to need counseling if you're going to be a counselor, basically. So don't think you're not going to need that. Anyway, those are the stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, formulated by Dr. Kubler. And I want you to acknowledge it because it's shame reducing. And when you know it's something you're going to go through, that means get to the other side and it's not forever, it's easier. It's easier to handle. But don't be afraid to get some extra help, some counseling. If you're having a hard time identifying what to do and just, weeks are going on and this behavior is dragging on and, you're maybe not in a really bad place, but now we're getting at a year. You just want to make sure you have somebody to talk to about that and know it's normal. And just acknowledge, I am going through the stages of grief. I lost a job I did for 20 plus years, more. If you have multiple kids, like I said, that I did for free. That was my sole purpose. These stages, give yourself grace. You're going to get into acceptance and then have a day of anger, and then maybe one day you'll cry, but you have to keep pushing through. We have to do it together. Just starting this channel is something I always wanted to do and to move. It's helped me move into acceptance. I still have parts back in those other stages and behaviors I'm working on. But when we're honest and authentic and admit it, and then we get better, and then we get better together. That's all for today. Thanks for hanging in on this one. I know it's a hard topic. Please like and subscribe. Subscribers and likes help boost the algorithms on YouTube, and we can get more people in our safe community. That's all for today. This was episode 6. Love you guys.